Sarah Martinez walked through the glass doors of Morrison Financial Services on a crisp Monday morning, her modest black blazer and simple ponytail giving her an understated appearance. At 28, she had learned to dress conservatively for corporate environments, keeping her personal history carefully tucked away beneath professional attire. The reception area buzzed with the typical energy of a mid-sized accounting firm. Employees in expensive suits hurried past with coffee cups and briefcases, their conversations filled with client names and quarterly projections. Sarah approached the front desk where a perfectly manicured receptionist looked up with a practiced smile. "You must be the new accounts coordinator," the receptionist said, her tone polite but distant. "I'm Jessica. Mr. Morrison is waiting for you in conference room B." As Sarah followed the directions down a hallway lined with awards and company photos, she noticed the subtle glances from other employees. Their eyes seemed to catalog everything about her appearance, from her department store shoes to her drugstore makeup. She had experienced this before in similar environments, the silent assessment that often preceded judgment. Conference room B contained a long mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs. 3 people sat at one end, clearly the team she would be joining. Mr. Morrison, a silver-haired man in his 50s, stood to greet her with a firm handshake. "Sarah, welcome to Morrison Financial. Let me introduce you to your colleagues." He gestured to a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, wearing what appeared to be a designer dress. "This is Rebecca Chen, our senior account manager." Rebecca offered a weak smile and a limp handshake. "Nice to meet you," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Her eyes quickly scanned Sarah from head to toe, lingering on her simple outfit with barely concealed disdain. The second introduction was to Marcus Thompson, a young man who looked fresh out of business school. His expensive watch caught the light as he shook Sarah's hand. "Welcome aboard," he said with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. During the orientation meeting, Sarah listened carefully as Mr. Morrison explained her responsibilities and the company culture. She took notes diligently, asking thoughtful questions about client management and reporting procedures. Despite her attentive participation, she noticed Rebecca and Marcus exchanging subtle glances whenever she spoke. "Your background shows you worked at a smaller firm before this," Rebecca commented during a brief break. "This environment might be quite an adjustment for you. We handle some very sophisticated clients here." Sarah nodded politely. "I'm looking forward to learning your systems and contributing to the team." Marcus leaned back in his chair with a slight smirk. "The learning curve can be pretty steep. Not everyone adapts well to our standards here." His comment carried an undertone that suggested he had already formed opinions about her capabilities. As the meeting concluded, Mr. Morrison handed Sarah a stack of client files to review. "Take your time getting familiar with these accounts. Rebecca and Marcus can help you understand our processes." Walking back to her assigned cubicle, Sarah overheard Rebecca whisper to Marcus, "She seems nice enough, but I wonder if she really understands what she's gotten herself into here. This isn't exactly entry-level work." Marcus responded quietly, "We'll see how long she lasts. Some people just aren't cut out for this kind of environment." Sarah settled into her workspace, a small cubicle in the corner of the office floor. The space felt isolated compared to the open collaboration areas where Rebecca and Marcus had their desks. She organized her supplies and began reviewing the client files, determined to prove herself through hard work and dedication. Throughout her first day, Sarah noticed the small social dynamics that defined the office culture. There were informal lunch groups, coffee break conversations, and after-work happy hour plans that seemed to flow naturally among certain employees. Rebecca and Marcus appeared to be at the center of these social circles, their conversations peppered with references to expensive restaurants and weekend plans at exclusive venues. During lunch, Sarah ate a homemade sandwich at her desk while researching the company's major clients online. She observed Rebecca and Marcus returning from what appeared to be an expensive restaurant, their conversation animated as they discussed their meal and made plans for drinks after work. "Did you see the new girl eating lunch alone?" Rebecca's voice carried across the office as she passed Sarah's cubicle. "I invited her to join us, but she said she had work to catch up on." This wasn't entirely true. Sarah had not received any invitation, but she chose not to correct the misconception. She had learned long ago that sometimes it was better to let people believe what they wanted to believe, rather than create unnecessary conflict. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah threw herself into understanding the client files and company procedures. She discovered that many of the accounts required detailed analysis and careful attention to regulatory compliance. Her methodical approach and thorough note-taking reflected skills developed through years of experience in high-pressure environments, though her colleagues seemed unaware of the depth of her background. By 5 o'clock, most of the office had cleared out for happy hour at a trendy bar down the street. Sarah remained at her desk, using the quiet time to familiarize herself with the company's software systems and review additional client documentation. The building's security guard made his evening rounds, nodding politely as he passed her cubicle. As she finally packed up her things around 7 o'clock, Sarah reflected on the day's interactions. She had encountered similar situations before, workplaces where appearances and assumptions often overshadowed actual capabilities. Her strategy had always been to let her work speak for itself, regardless of how others initially perceived her. Walking to her car in the parking garage, Sarah rolled up her sleeves in the warm evening air, careful to keep her forearms covered as she had done throughout the day. Some stories, she knew, were better revealed in their own time rather than used as shields against shallow judgments. 3 weeks into her employment at Morrison Financial, Sarah had established a routine that kept her focused on excellence while navigating the increasingly obvious social hierarchy. Her work performance had been exceptional, with several clients specifically complimenting her thorough analysis and attention to detail. However, her colleagues seemed more interested in her perceived shortcomings than her professional achievements. The morning coffee ritual had become a particular source of tension. While Rebecca and Marcus gathered around the expensive espresso machine in the break room, discussing their weekend adventures at wine tastings and gallery openings, Sarah quietly prepared her simple black coffee from the standard office pot. Their conversations always seemed to grow louder when she entered the room, as if to emphasize the differences in their lifestyles. "I can't believe you've never been to Le Bernardin," Rebecca said during one such morning, her voice carrying across the break room. "The tasting menu is absolutely divine. Of course, it's quite expensive, but you simply must experience fine dining at that level." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. Life's too short to settle for ordinary experiences. Some people just don't understand the importance of cultivating sophisticated tastes." Sarah continued preparing her coffee, choosing not to engage in the conversation despite the obvious implication. She had learned that responding to such comments often only encouraged more elaborate displays of superiority. The situation escalated during a team lunch meeting at an upscale restaurant downtown. Mr. Morrison had arranged the gathering to discuss quarterly goals and celebrate recent successes. Sarah had contributed significantly to landing 2 major new accounts, but the recognition seemed lost in the restaurant's intimidating atmosphere. As they reviewed the extensive menu, Rebecca made a show of explaining various dishes to Sarah. "The bouillabaisse here is exceptional, though it might be too adventurous for some palates. They also have simpler options if you prefer more familiar flavors." Sarah politely ordered a modest entree, while Rebecca and Marcus selected multiple courses with wine pairings. Throughout the meal, their conversation centered on topics designed to highlight their cultural sophistication: art exhibitions, international travel, and exclusive social events. "I'm thinking of taking a wine tour through Tuscany this fall," Marcus announced. "My college friend's family owns a vineyard there. It's not the sort of thing you can just book through a regular travel agent." Rebecca's eyes lit up. "How wonderful. I did a similar tour last year through Provence. Meeting the actual vintners and learning about their techniques was so much more meaningful than typical tourist experiences." Their conversation continued in this vein, with increasingly elaborate stories of exclusive experiences and connections. Sarah noticed how they frequently glanced in her direction while discussing these adventures, as if measuring her reaction to their obvious displays of privilege. Back at the office, the subtle mockery became more pronounced. Rebecca began leaving travel magazines and luxury lifestyle publications on Sarah's desk, always with a sticky note saying things like, "Thought you might enjoy reading about places you've probably never heard of, or some inspiration for when you're ready to expand your horizons." Marcus developed a habit of making jokes about Sarah's practical approach to everything from her lunch choices to her office supplies. When she used a regular ballpoint pen instead of an expensive fountain pen, he commented, Some people just don't appreciate the finer things in life. I suppose function over form works for certain personalities. The breaking point came during a department meeting where they were discussing client entertainment strategies. Rebecca suggested hosting an event at an exclusive country club, while Marcus proposed tickets to a high-end charity gala. When Mr. Morrison asked for Sarah's input, she suggested a more modest reception that would still impress clients while staying within budget. Rebecca's laugh was sharp and condescending. "Oh, Sarah, that's so practical of you. But our clients expect a certain level of sophistication. We can't just serve cheese and crackers in a conference room and call it entertainment." Marcus joined in with mock sympathy. "It's sweet that you're trying to be cost-conscious, but you have to understand our clientele. These are people who are used to the finer things. We need to meet them at their level." "I'm sure Sarah will learn about proper client relations eventually," Rebecca added with false kindness. "Not everyone has experience with this caliber of business relationships." Sarah maintained her composure throughout the exchange, though she noticed Mr. Morrison looking uncomfortable with his employees' behavior. She had dealt with similar situations before, and knew that defending herself would only provide more ammunition for their attacks. The mockery extended beyond work-related topics. Rebecca began commenting on Sarah's clothing choices, always framed as helpful suggestions. "You know, there's a wonderful personal shopper at Nordstrom who could help you develop a more professional wardrobe. First impressions are so important in our industry." Marcus contributed his own observations about Sarah's apparent lack of cultural awareness. When she admitted to not recognizing a reference to an obscure opera, he shook his head with exaggerated disappointment. "I forget that not everyone has the advantage of a liberal arts education. There's so much richness in classical culture that some people just never get exposed to." Their behavior attracted attention from other colleagues, some of whom began joining in the subtle ridicule. During coffee breaks and lunch conversations, Sarah became the subject of whispered comments about her ordinary background and lack of sophistication. The office environment grew increasingly hostile, though always maintaining a veneer of politeness that made direct confrontation difficult. Sarah's response was to focus even more intensely on her work. She arrived early, stayed late, and produced analyses that consistently exceeded expectations. Her client relationships flourished because of her genuine attention to their needs, rather than her ability to impress them with expensive entertainment. However, her professional success seemed only to intensify her colleagues' need to diminish her in other ways. The daily accumulation of small insults and condescending comments created an atmosphere where Sarah felt constantly judged and found wanting. Every interaction became an opportunity for Rebecca and Marcus to demonstrate their superior breeding and cultural knowledge while highlighting what they perceived as her limitations. Despite the growing hostility, Sarah maintained her professional demeanor and continued to excel in her actual job responsibilities. She knew that her worth wasn't determined by her colleagues' opinions, but the constant barrage of subtle mockery was beginning to wear on her patience. The time would come when their assumptions about her background would be challenged, but for now she endured their ridicule while quietly building an impressive professional record. 2 months into Sarah's tenure at Morrison Financial, the atmosphere had grown increasingly toxic. What began as subtle condescension had evolved into open mockery, with Rebecca and Marcus leading a campaign of workplace bullying that seemed to have no limits. Their behavior had emboldened others in the office to join in, creating an environment where attacking Sarah had become a twisted form of entertainment. The morning routine had become particularly brutal. As Sarah entered the break room for her coffee, conversations would pause dramatically, followed by exaggerated whispers and barely suppressed laughter. Rebecca had taken to making loud phone calls about her expensive purchases, always within earshot of Sarah's workspace. "I simply had to have the Hermes bag," Rebecca announced during one such call, her voice carrying across the office. "I know, it's more than some people make in a month, but quality is worth the investment. Some people just don't understand the difference between real luxury and cheap imitations." Marcus had developed an even more cruel approach, organizing informal office activities that were designed to exclude and humiliate Sarah. He arranged group outings to expensive restaurants, always discussing them loudly near her desk while making it clear she wasn't invited. "We're going to that new fusion place downtown," he would announce to Rebecca and their growing circle of followers. It's probably too sophisticated for some tastes, but we thought it would be fun to try something adventurous. You know how some people are afraid to step outside their comfort zones. The most painful development was the creation of what they called Sarah stories, fictional scenarios where they imagined her attempting to navigate situations requiring cultural knowledge or social sophistication. These stories were shared during lunch breaks and coffee conversations, always loud enough for Sarah to overhear. "Can you imagine Sarah at the opera?" Rebecca would say with mock concern. She'd probably think the programs were menus and try to order dinner during the intermission. Marcus would join in with elaborate embellishments. Or at a wine tasting, she'd probably ask for ice cubes and complain that the glasses were too small. These scenarios grew increasingly elaborate and cruel, with other colleagues contributing their own imagined situations. The office had essentially turned Sarah into a cartoon character, a symbol of everything they considered unsophisticated and ordinary. The harassment extended to her work environment. Sarah began finding items on her desk that were clearly meant as insults. Travel brochures for budget motels with sticky notes reading "More Your Speed," discount store catalogs with clothing circled in red ink, and restaurant coupons for chain establishments with comments like "Fine dining for beginners." During client meetings, Rebecca and Marcus would subtly undermine Sarah's contributions by questioning her recommendations or suggesting that her approach might be too simplistic for their sophisticated clientele. They had perfected a technique of appearing supportive while actually damaging her credibility. "Sarah has some interesting ideas," Rebecca would say with a patronizing smile, "though we might want to consider approaches that reflect our clients' expectations for excellence. Not everyone understands the nuances of high-level business relationships." The situation reached a new low during the office holiday party planning committee. Sarah had volunteered to help organize the event, hoping to contribute to team morale despite the hostile environment. Her suggestions for decorations and catering were met with open ridicule. "A potluck dinner?" Marcus laughed openly at Sarah's suggestion. "This isn't a church social, Sarah. Our clients and partners will be attending. We need something with actual class and sophistication." Rebecca's critique was even more cutting. "I think Sarah's heart is in the right place, but she clearly doesn't understand the image we need to project. Maybe she could help with cleanup instead of planning." The other committee members, emboldened by this display, began piling on with their own criticisms. Sarah's simple decorating ideas were dismissed as bargain basement, and her budget-conscious approach was mocked as penny pinching. The meeting devolved into an open session of humiliating Sarah under the guise of party planning. Word of the Yao committee meeting spread throughout the office, becoming another source of entertainment for Sarah's tormentors. The story was retold and embellished, with each version making Sarah appear more foolish and out of touch. The harassment began affecting Sarah's ability to do her job effectively. Colleagues would forget to include her in important email chains, leaving her scrambling to catch up on developments. Her access to certain files was mysteriously restricted, forcing her to request permissions that were granted grudgingly, and often with comments about her organizational skills. Rebecca had taken to scheduling impromptu team meetings during Sarah's lunch break, then expressing disappointment that she couldn't prioritize team activities. When Sarah attended these meetings despite missing lunch, Rebecca would comment on her apparent lack of energy or enthusiasm. The psychological warfare was systematic and relentless. Marcus began questioning Sarah's basic competence in front of clients, asking her to explain simple concepts as if she were a new intern rather than an experienced professional. These performances were designed to embarrass her while appearing to be legitimate management oversight. "Sarah, could you walk us through the basic principles of quarterly reporting?" he would ask during client presentations, his tone suggesting she might not understand fundamental concepts. "I want to make sure we're all on the same page with the fundamentals." The stress of constant harassment was beginning to show. Sarah's sleep was suffering, and she found herself dreading each workday. Her performance remained strong, but the emotional toll was significant. She'd begun eating lunch in her car to avoid the break room dynamics, and she timed her arrivals and departures to minimize interactions with her tormentors. Mr. Morrison seemed oblivious to the toxic environment developing in his office. He was often in client meetings or traveling, leaving Rebecca and Marcus free to orchestrate their campaign of humiliation without supervision. When he was present, they were careful to maintain a professional facade while continuing their psychological assault through subtle means. The breaking point was approaching as Sarah's patience wore thin. She had endured months of systematic mockery and professional sabotage, maintaining her dignity while her colleagues grew bolder in their attacks. Unknown to her tormentors, they were about to discover that their assumptions about her background were not just wrong, but dangerously misguided. Their campaign of humiliation had been built on the belief that Sarah was weak, inexperienced, and lacking in substance. They were about to learn that some people carry stories of strength and service that render their petty cruelties meaningless by comparison. The office atmosphere had reached a toxic crescendo by the beginning of Sarah's third month at Morrison Financial. What had started as subtle condescension had evolved into systematic workplace bullying that affected every aspect of her professional environment. Rebecca and Marcus had successfully created a culture where humiliating Sarah had become the office's primary source of entertainment. The morning of what would become the turning point started like any other recent day. Sarah arrived early to avoid the morning rush and the inevitable comments about her appearance or demeanor. She had learned to time her movements around the office to minimize exposure to her tormentors, but escape was becoming increasingly difficult as their campaign had expanded to include more participants. Rebecca arrived at her usual time, immediately launching into a loud phone conversation designed for maximum impact. "I'm telling you, the service at that little bistro was absolutely divine," she announced to no one Sarah could see. Of course, it's the kind of place where you need to understand proper etiquette. Not everyone would feel comfortable in such an refined environment. Marcus joined the performance by making a show of reviewing his weekend plans. "The gallery opening should be spectacular," he said to Rebecca, ensuring his voice carried across the office. "Though I suppose contemporary art isn't for everyone. It requires a certain level of cultural sophistication to truly appreciate." Their audience had grown to include most of the office staff, who had learned that participating in the mockery of Sarah was the path to social acceptance. Even employees who had initially shown kindness toward Sarah had begun joining in, afraid of becoming targets themselves. The catalyst for the day's events came during the monthly all-staff meeting. Mr. Morrison was presenting quarterly results and recognizing employee achievements. Sarah's work had been exceptional, contributing significantly to several major account wins, but the recognition felt hollow in the hostile environment her colleagues had created. "Our new accounts team has exceeded expectations this quarter," Mr. Morrison announced, with particular credit going to Sarah Martinez for her innovative approaches to client analysis and retention strategies. The acknowledgement should have been a moment of professional pride, but Sarah could feel the resentment radiating from Rebecca and Marcus. Their expressions darkened as Mr. Morrison continued praising her contributions, clearly interpreting her success as a threat to their perceived superiority. As the meeting concluded, Rebecca's mask of professionalism finally slipped completely. "Innovative approaches," she said loudly enough for several colleagues to hear. "I suppose when you're used to simpler clients, everything seems innovative." Marcus seized the opportunity to escalate the confrontation. "It's really quite something how some people can stumble into success without understanding the fundamentals of sophisticated business practice." The comments attracted the attention of other employees, who gathered around expecting another entertaining episode of Sarah baiting. The crowd gave Rebecca and Marcus the audience they craved, emboldening them to push further than they had before. "You know what I find fascinating?" Rebecca continued, her voice dripping with false intellectual curiosity. "How someone can work in financial services without apparently understanding the cultural requirements of dealing with affluent clients. It's like watching someone try to speak a foreign language they've never learned." Sarah felt the familiar tension building in her shoulders and neck, a physical response she recognized from other high-stress situations. She had endured months of this treatment by focusing on her work and maintaining her professionalism. But something in Rebecca's tone suggested this confrontation would be different. Marcus moved closer, clearly enjoying the attention from their growing audience. "I mean, there's nothing wrong with being ordinary," he said with mock sympathy. "Not everyone can aspire to excellence. Some people are just meant for simpler things." "Exactly," Rebecca agreed, warming to her theme. There's a certain nobility in knowing your limitations. Not everyone can handle the pressures and expectations of truly sophisticated environments. The crowd was now openly smirking and exchanging glances, anticipating Sarah's humiliation. They had witnessed months of her quiet acceptance of similar treatment and expected this episode to follow the same pattern. Some employees had their phones ready, hoping to capture a moment of particular embarrassment to share later. Sarah stood quietly for a moment, her breathing controlled and steady. She had learned techniques for managing stress and confrontation that her colleagues couldn't imagine. Skills developed in environments where the stakes were far higher than office politics and social status. "You seem to have a lot of opinions about my background and capabilities," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying a new edge that made some of the observers step back slightly. Rebecca, mistaking Sarah's controlled tone for weakness, pressed her advantage. "Oh, it's not personal, sweetie. We're just trying to help you understand the realities of working with our caliber of clientele. Some people need more guidance than others." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "Think of it as professional development. We're trying to help you recognize areas where you might need improvement." The condescending tone and fake concern were designed to humiliate Sarah, while appearing helpful to any outside observers. It was a technique they had perfected over months of psychological warfare, allowing them to maintain plausible deniability while delivering maximum emotional damage. Sarah's response was measured and controlled, but there was something in her posture that suggested a fundamental shift was occurring. "You've spent months making assumptions about who I am and what I'm capable of based on your extremely limited understanding of backgrounds different from your own." The quiet intensity of her voice was beginning to make some observers uncomfortable. This wasn't the meek acceptance they had come to expect from these confrontations. Rebecca, sensing that the dynamic was shifting but unable to resist pushing further, made the mistake that would change everything. "Oh, please, Sarah. We all know you're just an ordinary person trying to play in a league that's way above your capabilities. There's nothing mysterious or impressive about your background." Sarah rolled up her sleeves slowly, a gesture that seemed casual but deliberate. The office environment was warm, and removing her jacket's long sleeves was a practical response to the temperature. However, the action would reveal something that would completely reframe every assumption her colleagues had made about her. The moment had arrived when months of careful concealment would give way to a truth that would render all their mockery and condescension not just wrong, but embarrassingly misguided. The revelation would force them to confront the reality that their victim possessed a background of service and sacrifice that made their petty displays of privilege appear shallow and meaningless by comparison. As Sarah rolled up her sleeves in the warm conference room, the casual gesture revealed something that instantly changed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. On her right forearm, clearly visible and unmistakably authentic, was a detailed Marine Corps eagle, globe, and anchor tattoo. The iconic emblem was accompanied by Semper Fi in bold script, and below it the dates 2015-2019 marked her years of service. The effect on the room was immediate and dramatic. Rebecca's condescending smirk froze on her face as she processed what she was seeing. Marcus, who had been preparing another mocking comment, found himself speechless. The gathered crowd of office employees, who had been anticipating another moment of entertainment at Sarah's expense, suddenly looked uncomfortable and uncertain. The Marine Corps tattoo wasn't decorative or trendy. It was clearly the work of someone who had earned the right to wear that emblem, someone who had completed the grueling crucible of Marine Corps training and served with honor. The professional quality and meaningful placement spoke to genuine military service, not casual appropriation. Sarah's demeanor shifted subtly but unmistakably. Her posture straightened with a confidence that had always been there but carefully controlled. Her voice, when she spoke, carried an authority that came from having led troops in actual high-stakes situations, rather than just managing office politics. "You've spent months making jokes about my lack of sophistication and cultural experience," Sarah said, her tone calm but carrying an edge that made several people step back unconsciously. "You've questioned my ability to handle pressure and work with demanding clients." Rebecca attempted to recover, her voice noticeably less confident than before. "Well, we were just... Military service is certainly admirable, but this is a different kind of environment." Sarah's slight smile was not warm. "Different how, Rebecca? You think managing entitled financial clients is more challenging than leading Marines in combat zones? You believe organizing office parties requires more leadership skills than coordinating military operations? The questions hung in the air like challenges. Marcus, who had built his entire persona around assumptions of superiority, found himself facing the reality that his target had experience in situations where his worst day at the office wouldn't even register as a minor inconvenience. I spent 4 years in the Marine Corps, Sarah continued, her voice steady and controlled. 2 deployments to Afghanistan. I was responsible for the lives and welfare of Marines under my command in actual life-or-death situations. I've made decisions where mistakes meant people didn't come home to their families. The contrast between her actual background and their assumptions about her was staggering. Every joke they had made about her inability to handle sophisticated clients now seemed absurd when measured against her real experience managing operations where the stakes were infinitely higher. Marcus attempted to salvage the situation with false bravado. Well, that's certainly impressive, but this is the corporate world. Different skills, different requirements. Sarah's response was quiet but devastating. Different how, Marcus? You think your ability to order wine at expensive restaurants demonstrates more sophistication than navigating complex international situations with cultural sensitivity that could affect diplomatic relationships. You believe your college networking prepared you better for high-pressure client management than leading troops in hostile environments? The gathered crowd was now openly uncomfortable. What had started as entertainment at Sarah's expense had become a masterclass in how thoroughly they had misjudged someone based on superficial observations. Their victim had revealed herself to be someone with genuine experience in leadership, pressure management, and service to others that rendered their own achievements trivial by comparison. Rebecca's face had gone pale as the implications of her months of mockery became clear. Sarah, I had no idea. I mean, if we had known about your military background, you would have treated me differently, Sarah interrupted. Your respect was conditional on my credentials rather than my character or performance. You spent months judging my worth based on your assumptions about my background instead of observing my actual capabilities and contributions. The truth of her statement was undeniable. Sarah's work performance had been exceptional from day one, but it had been ignored in favor of attacking what they perceived as her inferior social status. Now they were forced to confront the reality that their target possessed a background of genuine accomplishment and service that made their own privileges appear shallow and unearned. Mr. Morrison, who had been observing the confrontation from the doorway, stepped forward with an expression that suggested he was reassessing everything he thought he knew about his office dynamics. Sarah, I had no idea about your military service. That's an impressive background that should have been recognized and respected from the beginning. Sarah turned to address her supervisor directly. With respect, sir, my military service shouldn't have been necessary for my colleagues to treat me with basic professional courtesy. My work performance and character should have been sufficient to earn respect in this environment. The statement highlighted the fundamental problem with the office culture that had developed. Respect and courtesy had been based on perceived social status rather than actual merit or human decency. Sarah's revelation forced everyone present to confront their own prejudices and assumptions. The silence in the room was deafening as the implications of the revelation settled. Rebecca and Marcus, who had built their identities around perceived superiority over Sarah, now faced the reality that she possessed experiences and achievements that completely overshadowed their own accomplishments. Their months of mockery had targeted someone whose background of service and leadership made their own lives appear privileged and sheltered. Other employees who had joined in the harassment were now looking anywhere but at Sarah, realizing they had participated in attacking someone who had voluntarily served her country, while they had enjoyed the freedoms and opportunities her service helped protect. At the moment marked up by a complete reversal of the office power dynamics, achieved not through revenge or retaliation, but through the simple revelation of truth that rendered all previous assumptions meaningless. The revelation of Sarah's Marine Corps service created an immediate and profound shift in the office atmosphere at Morrison Financial. The silence that followed, her quiet but devastating responses to Rebecca and Marcus stretched uncomfortably as everyone processed the complete reversal of assumptions that had governed their behavior for months. Rebecca was the first to attempt damage control. her voice shaky and uncertain. "Sarah, I owe you a sincere apology. If I had known about your military background, I never would have." She trailed off, realizing that completing the sentence would only highlight how her respect had been conditional on credentials rather than character. Marcus stood frozen, his usual confidence completely shattered. The elaborate persona he had constructed around his perceived superiority now seemed ridiculous when confronted with Sarah's genuine accomplishments. His expensive watch and designer clothing appeared meaningless compared to the earned respect represented by her military service. Mr. Morrison stepped fully into the room, his expression serious as he absorbed the implications of what had just unfolded. "I think we need to have some conversations about office culture and professional respect," he said, his tone indicating that changes were coming. "Sarah, could you please stay after this meeting? I'd like to discuss this situation privately." The gathered crowd began to disperse, but their departure was markedly different from their arrival. Where they had come seeking entertainment at Sarah's expense, they now left in uncomfortable silence, forced to confront their own participation in months of systematic harassment of someone who deserved their respect and gratitude. As the room cleared, Sarah remained calm and composed, but there was no mistaking the fundamental shift in her demeanor. The careful concealment was gone, replaced by the quiet confidence of someone who no longer felt the need to hide her true background and capabilities. Rebecca lingered near the door, clearly struggling with how to process the revelation. "Sarah, I feel terrible about how we've treated you. Is there anything I can do to make this right?" Sarah's response was measured and professional. "You can start by examining why you felt it was acceptable to treat anyone the way you treated me, regardless of their background. Military service shouldn't be a prerequisite for basic human decency and professional respect." The truth of the statement was undeniable. Rebecca's question revealed that she still didn't fully understand the fundamental problem with her behavior. She was sorry for attacking a veteran, but the deeper issue was her willingness to attack anyone she perceived as inferior. Marcus approached hesitantly, his earlier bravado completely gone. "I want to apologize too. I've been completely out of line, and I realize now how wrong I was about everything." Sarah nodded acknowledgement but didn't immediately forgive. "Marcus, you spent months trying to humiliate me based on assumptions about my background and capabilities. The problem wasn't that you were wrong about my military service. The problem was your willingness to systematically harass a colleague for any reason." The conversation that followed with Mr. Morrison was frank and comprehensive. Sarah detailed the months of harassment she had endured, providing specific examples of how Rebecca and Marcus had created a hostile work environment. Her military training in documentation and reporting served her well as she presented a clear and factual account of their behavior. "I'm horrified that this was happening in my office," Mr. Morrison said, his concern genuine. "Your military service aside, the behavior you're describing is completely unacceptable and potentially legally problematic for the company." Sarah's response demonstrated the leadership skills her tormentors had failed to recognize. "Sir, I'm not interested in lawsuits or revenge. I'm interested in creating a work environment where people are judged on their performance and character rather than their perceived social status." The changes that followed were swift and comprehensive. Mr. Morrison instituted mandatory training on workplace harassment and professional conduct. Rebecca and Marcus faced formal disciplinary action, including mandatory counseling and clear warnings about future behavior. The office's social dynamics were restructured to emphasize collaboration and mutual respect. More significantly, Sarah's true background became known throughout the company, leading to a complete reevaluation of her contributions and potential. Her military leadership experience was recognized as an asset, and she was offered additional responsibilities that utilized her proven ability to manage high-pressure situations and lead teams effectively. The transformation in how colleagues treated Sarah was dramatic but also revealed the superficial nature of their previous judgments. Many employees who had participated in mocking her now sought to curry favor by expressing admiration for her military service. Sarah accepted their changed behavior but remained cautious about trusting people whose respect was based on her credentials rather than her character. Rebecca struggled most with the aftermath of the revelation. Her entire identity had been built around perceived social and cultural superiority, and discovering that her primary target possessed accomplishments that genuinely overshadowed her own. Forced a painful period of self-reflection, she eventually requested a transfer to a different department. Unable to face the daily reminder of her misjudgment, Marcus took a different approach, attempting to rebuild his relationship with Sarah through exaggerated displays of respect and admiration for her military service. His efforts were transparent and self-serving, lacking the genuine understanding of why his behavior had been problematic, regardless of Sarah's background. The broader lesson for the office was profound. Sarah's revelation forced everyone to confront how quickly they had joined in or tolerated the systematic harassment of a colleague based on superficial observations and assumptions. Many employees were forced to acknowledge their own complicity in creating a toxic environment. For Sarah, the revelation marked the end of a challenging chapter, but also the beginning of new opportunities. Her military experience, once carefully hidden to avoid both positive and negative assumptions, became an acknowledged asset that enhanced her professional credibility and opened doors to leadership positions. The story of Sarah's time at Morrison Financial became a cautionary tale about the dangers of judging people based on appearances and assumptions. Her quiet dignity in the face of months of harassment, followed by the powerful revelation of her true background, demonstrated that real strength often comes from those who have nothing to prove, but everything to offer. The office learned that sophistication isn't measured by expensive tastes or cultural pretensions, but by genuine accomplishments, character under pressure, and service to others. Sarah's military tattoo didn't just reveal her past, it illuminated the shallow nature of the values and assumptions that had governed their workplace culture for far too long.